Coming to you live from the studio in Lake George, New York. I'm Bill Caliger, and it's time for the Billy C. Show. Good morning, good day, good evening, whenever you're watching, whenever you're listening. I hope you're doing okay. Today's show is being brought to us in part by Title Bout Championship Computer Game. That's right. Listen, this is one of those games where it's a simulation game. You'll be hearing some of the results of our usage of the game a little later in the show. What you could do is you could take a fighter, dream fight, or even a preview of a fight and punch it in there and let the computer tell you how the fight's going to go. Now, it's not like one of these graphically realistic games because it's certainly not, but it's really cool. You could take like a Jack Johnson and put him up against a Klitschko and see how that would have fared. Get yourself a copy. Visit our website, billycboxing.com, and click on the banner. You'll see it, Title Bout. Today's show is also being brought to us in part by the Southern Gourmet Spice Company. Check it out, www.southerngourmetspice.com. This is where I get my Kenny Bear's barbecue rub from there. I love it on everything. And my new favoritist, my mostest favoritist, is the blackened seasoning, but they also have a seasoned salt. So check that out. You're going to love it. Just visit southerngourmetspice.com and make sure you tell them Billy C. sent you. And finally, today's show is being brought to us in part by my book, Tom Molyneux, From Bondage to Baddest Men on the Planet, is available right now where all good books are sold. You can get a copy of this book right now while you're watching or listening to this very show. Just visit barnesandnoble.com or amazon.com. Find out why I'm so adamant about getting Tom Molyneux's story told. And yeah, I've been hawking the book for a couple of years now. Just keep, if you buy yourself a copy, if everybody buys a copy, then I get to write another one. Then I'll get to write another one. I might even read a book or two. But anyway, all right, coming up on the show today, in addition to some of the boxing news that we're going to cover, especially the fights yesterday, we're going to be taking, from last week's show, we were honoring Marvelous Marvin Hagler, and we started talking about other middleweights and where Marvelous fits in to the large scope of things in the middleweight division. And we kept mentioning three fighters, Stanley Ketchel, Harry Greb, and Sugar Ray Robinson we definitely mentioned, but I'm not gonna bring him into the picture today. But the third one was Carlos Monzon. Let me start off by saying this: the best ever TBE in the sport of boxing was Sugar Ray Robinson. You younger whippersnappers could think it's a more modern fighter or whatever, but when everything shakes out, the greatest fighter that ever laced on a pair of boxing gloves or shoes, or both at the same time, is Sugar Ray Robinson. There's no question about it. There'll never be another Sugar Ray Robinson because the sport has changed. Something that we're going to get into when we talk about those guys, and something I'm going to get into coming up here in a minute or two about the styles of boxing and why today's fighters, this is going to pain me to have these words come out, but the truth of the matter is today's fighters are definitely better than yesteryears. Now, when I say that, I mean that, in a way where it's more or less, the reasoning behind it is more or less because we know how to train better, eat better, all these things. So that's what I'm talking about. As far as heart and determination and just overall toughness, that is not in comparison. But anyway, let's move forward. Before I get caught up in my own whatever. But all right, yesterday, Dillian White avenged his loss to Alexander Povetkin in 4 rounds. Here's the thing. The official time was 2 minutes and 39 seconds. Povetkin didn't look himself. But wait a minute, maybe he did. He's 41 years old, and the guy has been in some wars. He looks slow. He's done, in my opinion. He drops to 36 wins, only 3 losses with 1 draw, and 25 of his wins coming by knockout. Dillian White improved to 28 wins and 2 losses with 19 of his wins coming by knockout. They said, the announcers and some post-fight comments said, he looked shaky from the get-go. And then they had the balls to turn around and blame it on the fact that he had COVID. A couple months ago. Listen, boys and girls, COVID is an extremely contagious thing that we're dealing with, obviously. But let's make no mistake. Let's stop blaming everything on COVID. It's just a typical response for today's people where nobody holds anybody accountable. The bottom line is Povetkin's 41 years old. He's been in wars. And let me tell you, this is where I was telling you I was getting into styles. If you had a guy like Povetkin, and I had a comment last week about, I said that the British fighters, the UK carries the sport on their back. And I mean that. I feel that they do. And then somebody said, they don't know how to fight. You got to come to the U.S. Well, here's the thing. There's some truth to that statement. What I meant was the UK carries boxing on their back because of the fans. The fans are much more knowledgeable to the sport. The styles in which some other countries train their fighters is what holds certain fighters back. I think that's the case with Povetkin. If you look at the way he fights, today's American-style fighter has the advantage. They move, they box, they get out of the way. Povetkin's style is to try to wear you down, to get in close, to inflict damage to your body, chop the tree, so to speak, which works. But as the size and dynamic of the sport changes in terms of the heavyweight division, and you're dealing with guys like White or go back a few years to Lennox Lewis and Klitschko and, of course, Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury, et cetera, that style is really hard to be successful. And the reason is because you got to eat so much leather before you can inflict damage. I think some of these other countries, specifically like Russia, because Povetkin's a Russian fighter, they need to alter their style. They need to get in, like Lomachenko, for example, has altered the style. He's not fighting in that standard European type style, and a lot of the English fighters still do. They standing up straight. Their chin is right out there with a big X on it. Just punch me here and I'll go down. I think that the style and the age all caught up with Povetkin. I'm not going to blame it on COVID. They would have noticed that there was a difference of him during training camp. So let's be real. Also on that card, in the co-main event was a heavyweight, Fabio Wardley. He stopped Eric Molina in the 5th round, 52 seconds. It was kind of a weird stoppage. Molina's 38 years old. I mean, the punch that seemingly did damage, it was like a delayed reaction, and then Molina fell on his back and just laid there, and then got up. His corner was complaining while he was still laying on the ground. I think that they followed the script in this fight, if you know what I'm talking about. Molina, his best days are certainly behind him, and even his best days weren't that great. But it was a good test for Wardley. But let me tell you about Wardley. Wardley, for all you Brits out there that have high hopes for Wardley, he's got a long way to go. This is a fighter that should take what I'm saying to heart and maybe bring in an American-style trainer to join his team. He leaves himself wide open, and quite frankly, I think he's too small for the heavyweights today. Heavyweights today got to be much bigger. I don't see, and no offense to anybody, but I don't really see Wardley going that far in this sport, in the heavyweight division, once he gets to this next level, which ultimately they're fighting Molina, so it looks like they're trying to get to that next level. But the fight of the night, in my opinion, was a super welterweight. Ted Cheeseman, the Big Cheese, knocked out James Metcalf right at the bell in the 11th round, which is also kind of strange. They say the official time was 3 minutes and 10 seconds of the 11th round. I don't know how that's possible when rounds only go 10. They added the 10-second count to the time of the round. I gotta reach out and find out if that's the way it's supposed to be. I've never, to be honest with you, I've never seen that in 33 years of following this sport and being involved in boxing. I can't recall another time when that happened. I've seen many at the bell victories, and they basically say 3 minutes of the such and such round, not 3 minutes and 10 seconds. So I got to look into that. But what a fight this was. Here's an example. Cheeseman improves to 17 wins, 2 losses, and a draw, with 10 of his wins coming by knockout. Metcalf loses for the first time in his career. He's 21-1 now with 13 knockouts. This is a case where Cheeseman, again, tighten up your defense a little bit, and maybe this guy's going to make a splash, or at least be competitive with some fighters. Can certainly take a shot, and he's got some hidden pop. Metcalf, his style was, again, similar, European, trying to wear his opponent down. He had much pop, no question about that. Ran out of gas, got beaten up, and that knockout was a real, it was a not KO real type style. So check it out if you missed it. And Campbell Hatton, son of there's only one Ricky Hatton, made his pro debut and won a 4-round decision. All of the judges in this case in England, it's just the referee. He scored it 4 rounds to none, 40-36 against Jesus Ruiz, who drops to 0-11. I noticed one comment with the commentators. They said Campbell is learning that the pros are much different than the amateurs, and I think that was a big lesson here because the truth of the matter is an 0-11 fighter, if you look at the record, and that's what I keep trying to say, I've been saying that for 18 years now on this show, you can't judge a fighter by his record. A lot of younger American fans do that. Even Sugar Ray Robinson, they look at him and say, oh, look, he's got double-digit losses, he can't be good. They only think a fighter is good based on the wins, and if he loses, he's no good. That is such a false statement. It's not even funny. But anyway, I'll get into some other news in a little bit, but we are going to talk about these 3 middleweights. I'm going to get Dax Kahn on here first. But one thing I do want to mention is Mike Tyson was coordinating a 3rd fight with Evander Holyfield. It's been on, it's been off, it's been on, it's been off, and it's off again now. I'm curious about that fight because I know it's like a exhibition. It's going down as an exhibition. But the truth of the matter is, I don't think Evander Holyfield would look at that fight as an exhibition. I'm sorry. I just don't. I would think that he would go in there to make it real for 100%. I wouldn't even think twice about him going into that fight thinking that it was an exhibition. That would be the closest to a real fight that you're going to see. I just wonder how Mike Tyson will take it. Mike Tyson just looks like he's having fun in there when he fought Roy Jones Jr. collecting a big paycheck. I don't think you'd have to look at it that way if he stepped in with Holyfield. We'll keep your eyes on that. And speaking of comebacks, Oscar De La Hoya has been toying with a comeback. Mentioned it the other day that he's coming back July 3rd, 48 years old. I haven't heard him discuss that it would be, the last time I heard him mention that he was thinking about a comeback, he was talking about a real fight, not an exhibition. They are tossing around Floyd Mayweather's name, but the last report was a UFC fighter, so that kind of makes me think it's one of those BS. Not that it's BS. I got to be careful. I don't want to offend anybody, but an exhibition fight. But in any event, we're going to get Dax Kahn on here in a second. But before we do, I just want to remind you, buy a copy of my book, man. Go to Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com. And speaking of Dax Kahn, you could see a whole section in the book written by the very one and only Dax Kahn. Speaking of Dax Kahn, he's with me right now. What's up, brother?
Hey, good morning. I'm done reading an email from Alex Pierpoli stating how much he because he's in bed by 10 o'clock, and I'm laughing to myself because that was my exact thought.
Yeah, well, both of you guys were bragging about staying up all night. You know, I'm in bed in my feety pajamas by 7, and that's on a wild night. Fridays, I stay up till like 7:30, but anyway.
And I think I replied to him, like, I'll get to watch some boxing. I'm actually in bed before a new day starts officially.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Shout out to my man Kenny. I see him watching our live stream right now, and he's the guy. I keep telling you guys, I'm talking about SouthernGourmetSpice.com. That's the man, and we'll get to that a little bit later, but I'm glad he's out. But anyway, first things first, Dax. Last night, I know you watched yesterday, like Alex was saying, which I agree. I wish all fights were on at that time. I mean, this midnight crap is tough for everybody. But Dillian White stopped Alexander Povetkin in 4 rounds. I thought White looked good, but I thought Povetkin looked extremely old and sluggish. What was your thoughts on the fight?
It was a fast start for White. I was actually a little bit concerned at first, thinking that he's being overzealous and he's going to walk into something like he did in the first fight. Povetkin was all over the place that first round. He reminded me very much of when Galata fought Lewis. Remember, Galata comes out there really strong, and Lewis is the one that ends up knocking Galata all over the place, but Galata's legs never seemed to be there from the opening bell. Dillian White wasn't really landing those shots. When you go and you look back, you see that a lot of them just grazed or they missed. But Povetkin's legs weren't there from the start. And actually, even when you've seen the video footage of Povetkin entering into the arena, and commentators had even stated it, and a lot of people on Twitter were saying the same thing, that Povetkin just really didn't look like somebody who was arriving for a fight of that magnitude, which, at his stage and Dillian White's stage, that fight is huge in terms of where their career goes next. Povetkin looked flabby at the weigh-in as if he hadn't trained a day since their first fight last year. I know he had COVID. There may or may not be some lingering effect. Let's not use that as an excuse or detract from Dillian White's win. But, COVID does cause, some neurological issues, some stamina issues, and makes it a little bit hard to maintain your electrolytes. Not permanently. Some guys heal quicker than others, so it's possible that could be it. Or, as always, Father Time is undefeated. Father Time, he just happens one up in there and decide that this is it. I'm taking the title, and that could be what happened. I don't know, but Dillian White, he didn't look great, but it was a good win for him and getting him back where he needs to be on that trail of inside that top 10.
Hey, listen, I mean, talking about the COVID, and this is my point. I know we COVID's serious. I know, and everybody that has had it, tell us that it lingers on and on and on. And, I'm not downplaying the virus at all. But here's the thing. Wouldn't the team have noticed that in training? And if so, for a fight this magnitude, just like many fighters in the past, you alter the date. You come up with, you postpone it. You do what you have to do. Fighters that... like the one that comes to mind immediately is Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather. Yeah, Manny Pacquiao didn't want to upset the apple cart. He hurt his shoulder, this and that. But at the end of the day, it cost him the fight. Maybe we could say the same thing about Povetkin. Don't get me wrong. I was shocked that he beat White the first time. But I just, why go into a fight if you're not 100%? And if there are lingering effects from COVID-19, they would have seen that in training camp, don't you think?
Well, me having it, I will actually say that once I was COVID-free, let's say, and, about a week later, I started feeling better, and then all of a sudden, I started being tired, and no matter how much I slept, and, it gave me all kinds of other issues, and I went to go see a specialist down in the city, and he's the one that was telling me all those things that I was telling you. And, it was a long time before I was actually able to get my body back on track in terms of, just my B12 and things like that. So, and again, that's always a possibility. But the other most likely possibility is the fact that he is 41 years old. He has been, other than that fight last year, pretty inactive, as all top fighters have been. So maybe, they just didn't want to take the chance of postponing it, and if they did, possibly that could have been postponed until the fall, and then here we go, we got Alexander Povetkin, by that time, could be 42. I'm not sure where his birthday is, so, this isn't even an older fighter, and on the other hand, too, they might have been thinking that since the other fight was not too long ago, they had Dillian White figured out, and Povetkin is a smart fighter considering his experience and all the top guys he's been in there with, that, Dillian White was figured out and they'd be able to do exactly what they did the last time. I don't know. Those are all just speculations, but, in the end of the night, what happened was Dillian White, he avenged his loss, and now let's see what happens to Dillian White next, because I'm a big Dillian White fan, but he really frustrates me.
Oh, no, I hear you. The conditioning sometimes is my big question with him. But another fight on that card, and I'm going to leave the Wardley fight out. I mean, he won. But the fight that really impressed me was Ted Cheeseman against James Metcalf. What were your thoughts on that one?
I really liked that fight. I was surprised. I didn't think that Cheeseman was going to come out there and perform so well. I've seen Cheeseman fight, several times before. I thought he was a solid fighter, but I never really seen Cheeseman kind of, like dig the body and get that physical. So, and Cheeseman remained composed, and Metcalf, which was driving me nuts last night when, Connor Hatton, who made his debut, Campbell Hatton, he made his debut. They would not stop talking about Ricky Hatton, but during the Metcalf fight, they mentioned that his father is Shea Neary, and Metcalf fights a lot like his father. But so I think that Cheeseman went out there, he performed well, and if Cheeseman continues to improve, I do believe that Cheeseman can be a genuine, legitimate world class contender.
Cheeseman should be. I was talking about the styles earlier, and this is where sometimes the European style hurt the fighters. I'm looking at Cheeseman. He seems to do a lot of things right, except that chin is sticking out right out there for the it's got an X on it. Hit me. I mean, this is where the American trainers, I think, and I hate to say it, but I think that they excel over European trainers.
It's just, for years, we're not talking, when I say years, people think, oh yeah, 10 years, 20 years. No, years, we're talking hundreds of years. They've been using that same style, that European style. It's that European style that was so easy to figure out, is how come that cliche that fans used to say, oh, Eurobum. Any fighter not from the United States was considered a Eurobum, because they all use that same stand-up style, the 1-2 punch with the chin straight up in the air. But Cheeseman, again, he has gotten much better from the last time I've seen him. His style is becoming more as you stated, it's not so much stand-up, so that's why I really believe that, Cheeseman, if he continues to improve, we can see that same style, that same type of performance from him. Another fight or two, that Cheeseman should be, considered a genuine threat, and, possibly, come over to the United States and fight one of the names, maybe, top 15, top 20 names in that division. And if he does well there, then, Cheeseman could be a legitimate threat, and we could see Cheeseman, inside the title hunt in another year or two.
What I like about Cheeseman, and this seems to work either way. Either it helps a fighter improve or it destroys a fighter. And this is overcoming obstacles outside of the ring. And he, had some issues outside the ring that he has overcame. And it seems that he's focused. And his opponent, Metcalf, was no slouch. I mean, this was a tough guy. He was a scary, seek and destroy kind of a fighter. I think this fight, could have gone either way. I know the announcing team was mentioning at the end that the fight was going to boil down to those last 4 rounds. And I'll tell you what, I agree. I mean, it was a back-and-forth fight. I loved every minute of that fight. That fight was the reason... I thought was the reason that people watch boxing. I mean, that fight really was the fight of the night, in my opinion. I did like Campbell Hatton's fight, but he's not like his dad, at least looking at one fight.
And again, just to go back to the Cheeseman fight, the difference there was Cheeseman was able to be versatile and switch up his tactics a little bit, and that's what gave him the advantage, and that's what allowed him to pull out that late win. In terms of Campbell Hatton, it drives me nuts when, and there's no way around it, where, your father is a legend like that, and so well loved worldwide. Of course, you're going to be in their shadow, except so early on and throughout the fight talked more about Ricky Hatton than what was actually going on inside the ring. And in my opinion, it can be very dejecting. Look at Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. Look at how his whole career, no matter what he was doing, all they did was talk about Julio Cesar Chavez Sr. When you're sitting there and you're talking about the father while the son had just won his debut, you're kind of robbing him of his moment. And how dejecting is that? Especially when you're a young fighter, you're going to be sitting there thinking to yourself later on, is this what I'm going to have to go through my whole career? No matter what I do, it's always going to go back to my father.
Yeah.
And, how are you going to be able to carve out your own legacy?
It is. And I think that these guys, these sons of major successful fighters, should know that going in, Dax. I mean, you know as well as I do, and both of those examples are legit, no doubt. But how do you live up to your father when his name is Julio Cesar Chavez or Ricky Hatton? I mean, everybody loved Ricky Hatton in the UK. I mean, I loved Ricky Hatton, and I'm here. So yeah, I think I know what you're saying, and I agree with what you're saying. We need to focus on the person in the ring, not the guy that helped bring that person in the ring. But when you have those shoes to fill, and even at an early on, and I'm not suggesting it's fair, that's something that they have to get out of that shadow. The same thing happened with Camacho. Camacho Jr., same thing. And he was never like his father. I mean, no disrespect, Junior. I mean, I love the guy. I know him personally. But, I mean, it's just, it is what it is. Not all the same thing in other sports. In basketball, when you got a son coming out and he's, look at Evander Holyfield's son playing football. I mean, they're tough acts to follow, man.
No, that's going to happen no matter what. It doesn't even matter if it's sports. Look at, if you're an actor, look at Law and Order SVU, Mariska Hargitay. They always talk about the fact that, her mother's Jane Mansfield, who her father was. And Mariska Hargitay has, carved out her own legacy, so to speak. And, of course, I don't see anything wrong with actually kind of using the father, especially, somebody like Ricky Hatton or Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. as kind of like, a springboard to help the kid fast track, some popularity and get him some backing and some bigger paydays. But literally, if you go back and you watch that fight again, they continuously spent more time talking about Ricky Hatton than actually what was going on in the ring. At point in time, if you go and look at our Twitter account, I sat there and I looked and I had put a little timer on my cell phone. They went actually 90 seconds without talking about what was going on in the ring at all. All they did was talk about Ricky Hatton.
Yeah, no,
they weren't even doing their job. You know what I mean? You're there to call the fight. They weren't even doing their job calling the fight. They're talking about Ricky Hatton.
Well, I think in their defense, I think that if Campbell was doing some spectacular things in there, with the exception of, they would have been forced to talk about him. It's called filling time. You know that. You know how to do that. But
yeah, I mean, just think if you're a young fighter, and you go back. Of course, they're going to go back and look at that footage because they want to see for themselves how they looked. And you're listening to that, and you're saying to yourself, wow, I just landed a great 1-2. I dug the body, and meanwhile, they're showing pictures of my father that's sitting way back 15 rows with his COVID mask on, and they're talking about something that he did 20 years ago.
No, I know.
That's discouraging. And again, in your mindset, if this continues on for another 2, 3, or 4 fights, or, gosh forbid, he wins like a small regional title and is in the point where you start getting genuine hopes in terms of, okay, if he continues progressing like this, I can see him as a future world champion. But then they're still talking about the father, and more or less, it's just discouraging. Like, what? If I'm out here fighting for me, I'm doing what my father did. If this is all they're going to do, then why? Why bother? It can make him either walk away from the sport, or can just discourage him to the point where they figure, all right, what? If they're not going to give me the full attention, I might as well just make some money. Much like Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. did, where, he made a lot of money and got a lot of fights off his father's name. And then once he got that money, more or less, he can care less about the sport. And Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., despite all the criticism and what he has shown, being lazy, failing some drug tests and stuff, he's actually a better fighter than what he's credited for when he is in shape.
Well, he's still not senior.
I'm not saying he's not senior, but again,
I'm not saying
he's still a lot better fighter than what he is when he's in shape. But I actually do believe that because of always being in the shadow of his father, and on the other hand too, maybe a little bit of the springboard off his father's name that helped him make. Now all of a sudden you really lose your desire and your hunger. It's just, and you have to blame the media, not the fans. You have to blame the media, because the media are the ones that the fans listen to, and the media are the ones that are talking while you're in there performing.
That's a good point. All right, so last week we talked about Marvin Hagler. We were giving him accolades, and actually 4 names kept coming up. I said earlier, Sugar Ray Robinson, I'm not including in this discussion because, in my opinion, he's the best ever, and there's no need to put him in this mix. We don't need to say anything about Sugar Ray Robinson we haven't said, and if there's anybody that doesn't think he's the greatest fighter of all time, well, then they should learn a little more about the sport. So, Marvin Hagler fits right in as an all-time great, and the 3 names that kept coming up was Carlos Monzon, Stanley Ketchel, and Harry Greb. So starting with Carlos Monzon, who was the more recent of the 3 fighters, what's your thoughts of Monzon and where he fits in the scheme of great middleweights, with a discussion today, and, with some of the fans that don't include him in the discussion? They go back as far as B-Hop.
Well, Carlos Monzon, actually, before I was born, a few years before I was born, he was so good that in 1972, Carlos Monzon shared Fighter of the Year honors with Muhammad Ali. So that tells you how good he was. That he shared it with the heavyweight champion. Many times throughout the years, he has been voted by credible publications like Ring Magazine, Boxing Illustrated, all the top TV sporting networks, the ESPNs and so on, as the second best middleweight of all time, just behind Robinson, who's the best, period, as you stated. He was a champion for 7 years. He defeated, I forget, it was 11 or 14 top 10 ranked contenders, and genuine, not like today's magically appearing sanctioning body mandatories, but genuine contenders. Monzon was not smoke and mirrors. His power was genuine. What you see a lot today in terms of how these younger fans judge through these small clips that are carefully chosen and these videos that are made on YouTube that will make a fighter look either better or worse than they actually were. But believe me, Carlos Monzon was just as good as his record on any video, any highlights, any discussion could, claims that he was. So with his accomplishments and the footage that's available, with the list of opponents that he had faced and that he had beaten, such as Emil Griffith twice, Benny Briscoe, Jose Naples, Rodrigo Valdez, Denny Moyer, all legends in their own right. Carlos Monzon was something special. So Carlos Monzon, out of all of those, I think him against Hagler, that would be the closest and hardest fight to pick.
It would be a close fight, and they were more modern, so to speak, similar styles, really very similar styles. The thing, and similar careers. If you look at it, I mean, in his first 20 fights, he had 3 losses, which obviously he avenged. He had 9 draws in his career, which is kind of unusual during that era. It wasn't unusual back further, like when we get to Harry Greb, but in his era, it was. He was a come-at-you guy, and you're right. There was so many great fighters. Denny Moyer was a fighter that's on that list, who was a tough guy. Now, people could look at him and see, well, he's got 22 losses, but come on. If you look at the guys he fought, that was a fighter that he walked through in 5 rounds. Benny Briscoe, Briscoe was one of these. they don't give out awards, the Benny Briscoe award, for nothing. Multiple fights with Valdez, Emil Griffith. You're right. He was a guy that came at that time, following in the footsteps of some of these earlier fighters, and then just knocked it out of the park. The thing about him, which also, he was beloved. They loved this guy in Argentina. He was like a hero, despite some of the negative things he did, which obviously the big thing was what he ended up going to jail for, killing his wife, throwing her off a window, a balcony. It was what had happened with that.
Well, in terms of how good he was, you brought up where he was coming in just after some great legends, and he wasn't continuously compared to them once he hit his prime. Something him and Marvin Hagler both have in common is the fact that they did have some rough, a shaky start early on. I think that that's when they both, outside of Hagler's loss to Leonard, that's when they both had their losses, was early on, and then once they hit their prime, they were literally almost unbeatable. And unfortunately, Carlos Monzon is nowadays more known by especially the younger fans for that incident that you mentioned, his 1988 conviction, where they say he killed his common-law wife, Alicia Muniz. Whether or not that happened, I don't know. She fell off the second-story balcony. But again, Carlos Monzon also fell from the balcony, and he suffered, I believe, it was a couple broken ribs and a couple clavicles. And then, of course, there's that other aspect where his tragic death. When he died in that car accident while on furlough for good behavior, he was on his way back to Las Flores prison. In his home after going to his hometown. I think one of the passengers was killed as well. So Carlos Monzon has all that around him. He has not only the in-ring legend of beating top guys, being a come forward guy, but then he also has that sad story of reaching the top and then having all vanish, going to prison, and then the car accident. So it's kind of do you understand what I'm getting to?
Oh, yeah.
Every aspect that you can possibly think of that you'd want to put in a movie, Carlos Monzon actually lived, that you wouldn't even have to make up, because Carlos Monzon's life is almost like a script.
It certainly is, and it would make a great movie. And he had a very hard youth, childhood. He brought, climbed out of it and used boxing to help him, but many people believe that he was still scarred internally, and he did have a violent streak towards women. But Alicia Munoz was just as, I think drugs and alcohol used to get them both pretty jacked up. She shot, I believe it was her or a previous wife that shot him twice in an argument. He was shot in the arm and in the shoulder at one point prior to him being charged with the murder and subsequently doing time. He was charged with, sentenced to 11 years. Just to explain the deal about his death, this was a guy that got, yes, he was convicted of murder, basically. Got sentenced 11 years. Was doing his time, was let out on weekends to, do whatever. And he was racing back from one of those furloughs. He was running late when he ran the car off the road and subsequently died. But he got some special treatment because of who he was, Dax. And it would have been interesting. I mean, he was in his 50s. He was 52 years old. His career was over. But it would have been interesting for me to hear his take on the sport today. I think that, his legacy inside the ring is cemented. But some of the things that take place after a fighter's career is over, when they stay involved with the sport, is intriguing to me, especially in today's world. Guys like, Ricky Hatton or Holyfield or Mike Tyson, what they do they Hagler walked away from the sport. These guys didn't. Would have been interesting. How would you have seen Monzon against Hagler?
I actually think that, and I know I hate giving these answers, but I think Monzon was the better boxer slightly, but I do believe it would have turned into a slug out between two big punchers, who both had that same mindset, of just of war down careers. I think Monzon, it was either his last or second to his last fight against Valdez, and Hagler was down against Roldan. Neither one were really hurt in those fights, so they both had, great chins. And it would be a case of who made the first mistake for the other one to capitalize on, and who would maintain that momentum, because I really don't see either knocking the other one out. I think it would just come down to a decision, and whoever was in the best shape that night, and whoever was able to throw the most punches and land the most punches, is how that would turn down to, because I really could not see either one knocking the other one out.
It's an interesting call, because what I'm going to say, and the reason why, and no disrespect to Hagler, because I love Hagler, but Carlos Monzon, I think the advantage, and I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, that size advantage.
You just took the words out of my mouth, because their style was so similar. I just think, and I was going to use Tommy Hearns as an example, because the immediate argument that somebody would give me is, well, Tommy Hearns was way bigger than Hagler, and look what he did to him. But Tommy Hearns wasn't built like Monzon and didn't have the style like Monzon. It's almost like Hagler would be fighting himself, but a bigger version. And that's why I would lean towards Monzon. No, I'm not discrediting Hagler at all. But to be honest with you, all of these fighters would have given Hagler a tough go. And Carlos Monzon, the way he fought and his size and strength, would have been a tough out for the Marvelous One.
Oh, I agree, and I'm not discounting. I'm just saying, it's just they were both just so good at their peak, and because they were so similar, and they had that mindset, and they both had such great jaws, it's really hard to choose. But if that fight actually happened, and I had to put money on the line, I would probably put my money on Monzon, because Monzon, again, was a slightly better boxer, and he was a little bit bigger, and Hagler could be outboxed. Tommy Hearns, I've always wondered, what if Tommy Hearns would have been able to do like he did against Ray Leonard after he had opened up those cuts on Hagler early, and then instead of willingly trade with him, avoided some of that continuous pressure of Hagler and opened up that cut a little bit wider, maybe that fight would have been stopped on cuts. Look at the fight against Roberto Duran. That was a very, even though Hagler won, that was a lot closer fight than a lot of people realized. A lot of people thought it was going to be, because Roberto Duran was such a superior boxer. And we seen, Hagler, of course, we've seen the problems that he had with Ray Leonard. So, in terms of the size and in terms of that aspect and, being a slightly better boxer, I guess, I would, definitely go towards Monzon slightly. Not definitely, but just slightly.
Well, Monzon, his career, 87 wins, 3 losses, 9 draws with a no contest. Now we bring in Harry Greb, the Pittsburgh Windmill, a great fighter in his own right. 262 wins, 17 losses, 18 draws, and a no contest. This guy, it wasn't as big. How do you see him going? I mean, almost 300 fights, and he was still, even though he retired and then came back, he was still fighting at 32 years old when he passed away.
Greb, there's a guy that James Dominguez and Kelly Pavlik and a few other in that little circle, we all make fun of, where these fans, they see this real, choppy old footage of Greb, and some of these old timers swear that Harry Greb was the greatest middleweight of all time. Harry Greb and Stanley Ketchel both did well against the heavyweight champion. Greb was a slick boxer, but he wasn't as slick as Ray Leonard. He was ring savvy, but he wasn't Roberto Duran ring savvy, and he lacked power. In fact, his early fights at that division, he often complained that it was hard for him to maintain the middleweight limit. Remember, this is back when there was only 8 weight divisions and not 16. So a lot of times he was much smaller. There was actually a couple fights where he was outweighed by 15 to 20 pounds. Also, that with Greb, he was not really physically durable. There were a lot of fights he was injured in. One, his arm was actually broken early on by an opponent. So Greb actually, his ideal walk-around weight was in the 140s, unlike today where a 160-pound middleweight walks around at 175 pounds. So I really don't see him fending off a Marvin Hagler, who's coming straight at him looking to knock him out.
Well, and the other part about Harry Greb was that he was blind in one eye. He fought a lot of the latter part of his career basically blind. In one eye, which as well as anyone, you need both eyes in that ring, to see punches coming. The volume of
a question about Greb, that you mentioned that, and bringing up the division, and that Greb in himself, you can find different articles where he stated he would have been more comfortable fighting at welterweight. To your knowledge, is there any reason why he really didn't have a career at welterweight? Because there were plenty of opponents. Did Greb just not have the right management? Was there something that he did at some point in time where he was blackballed from fighting certain people? Which was very common back then.
Well, I think first of all, the weight classes weren't looked upon the way they are now. You were able to go and fight bigger guys, and nobody questioned it. I think that there was more money in it for them to do that versus going down. I think that he liked to not have to struggle making weight based on the book by Bill Paxton. He walked around almost at the same weight as he's ring at,
That's what I'm saying. He was, he wasn't, unlike today, he didn't really cut a lot of weight, and, that's why he would say, he never really felt like the bigger guy or the stronger or more dominant at middleweight, and his KO record more or less kind of, backs up that statement.
He didn't get his nickname because he wasn't throwing lots of punches. He would maul his opponents. It was a different style fighter. There were different, all of them were different style fighters in that era. I just think he was a tough guy. That guy almost had 3 fights in his career, and he passed away at 32, So, by today's, this heavyweight, under 10 fights at 32 now. So,
yeah. So remember, back then, even for these younger guys, go back and look at Rocky 1, the original Rocky, and where he was only 30 years old, and he was already considered washed up. So
right, they called anybody that hit 30. They were like old timers. You know?
Yeah, you were an old man.
Yeah,
overweight.
Exactly. 5'8". So fighting Hagler, it would have been an interesting fight because of the volume of punches. And I wondered, when I picture this fight in my mind, Dax, and I see Harry Greb throwing lots of punches, but Hagler used to, and you brought up the Tommy Hearns fight earlier. That's the fight. Hearns comes out, he's throwing volume punches. Well, Hagler matched it and was throwing volume punches. The only fight that I recall Marvin Hagler fighting where he didn't really assert himself as much as he probably should have was the Sugar Ray Leonard fight. But again, he was fighting based on what his opponent was doing. And I think it would have been interesting to see Hagler fighting Greb, because would we have seen the volume? Could Marvin have kept up with the volume that Harry Greb would have thrown at him? And if so, would he have tired? I don't recall Marvin Hagler ever getting tired in a fight. I really don't. I'm sure he did, but I never saw it, and Harry Greb didn't. So it would have been interesting to see if Harry Greb would have handled the power of Hagler, and could Hagler have handled the volume of punches from Harry Greb. I would think that this fight would have been a brutal fight, and I think it would have gone the distance. And I wouldn't have been surprised if this fight ended up as a draw, to be honest with you, because I think Hagler would have tried to match the punch output of Greb. He would have stunned Greb a few times, but Greb would have kept coming. I don't know. I'm waiting to see what Alex says with title bout, but I don't know.
And Greb, just like Hagler and just like Monzon, up until he reached his prime, his biggest disasters, his losses where he was stopped. I think he was only stopped 3 times in, those 100 and something fights. That happened early on, and they were against bigger guys. So, Greb had, quite the chin. So, but, would he have been able to stand there and trade with Marvin Hagler? Greb was able to get away with a lot of that volume punching because a lot of his opponents, not that they weren't good. And again, he did fight Gene Fullimer, but, the point is that a lot of those guys certainly didn't have the skill set that Marvin Hagler had in terms of defense and and offense.
Yeah, but the volume that he would throw at you would make you go into a defense mode. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Joe Calzaghe. Look at Joe Calzaghe, a guy who never known for his knockout power, really. But Joe Calzaghe did the same thing to a lot of guys just due to that sheer volume.
You look at who he fought. Tony Morello, Maxie Rosenblum, he fought. Johnny Wilson, Gene Tunney. The list goes. Tiger Flowers was his 2 losses. He lost very close fights with him. As a matter of fact, he was training for a 3rd fight when he passed away.
I can't believe you just brought up Maxie Rosenblum. I have a friend of mine whose father passed away not too long ago, and he had been a boxing fan dating back, to the 20s, and he had created this scrapbook from over the years of these newspaper articles, including ones that Jack Dempsey had written, and he put them in this scrapbook, and I get it, and the pages were so old that they were actually crumbling, but as I'm looking through it, one of the articles in there says that Maxie was not so slapsy tonight against Greb.
Oh, hey, Slapsy Maxie. He also another fighter that he fought aside from you said Gene Fulmer. I think you meant Gene Tunney because there was some famous fights against Tunney. But Mickey Walker, he beat Mickey Walker in a unanimous decision. So this is a guy that was in there with bigger fighters. There's no question about it. Would have been interesting to see him with Hagler. And finally, Stanley Ketchel. Stanley Ketchel is obviously the era that he fought in was, early 1900s Jack Johnson era. He fought Jack Johnson, 49 wins, 5 losses, 3 draws, 5'9", similar size to Hagler. But he died at 24 years old with almost 60 fights. This was a guy, the thing about Stanley Ketchel, Dax, is it's hard to really, everybody said how great he was. We can only go by write-ups on him, very few, very limited footage on him. The thing about him is it would have been so interesting to see how his career would have unfolded. Almost 60 fights at 24 years old. One of them being a loss to Jack Johnson, where we all heard the rumors where, Jack Johnson ended up with his tooth buried, with Stanley Ketchel buried in his glove. He rocked Jack Johnson, and then that was the end of it. Many people say that was a fight that wasn't supposed to be as serious as Ketchel took it, but he had that mean streak in him, and you've talked about that a lot with some of the current fighters that have a mean streak in them, like a Lomachenko has that mean streak while he's in the ring. Well, Stanley Ketchel did too. How would you have seen that fight go?
Ketchel and Johnson were actually friends, and you're right, it wasn't supposed to go that way. It was supposed to be more of an exhibition for both of them. And he actually, when he dropped Johnson, Johnson gets up and he comes back with a combination of his own and just stops the fight not too long after. But that just tells you how hard that Ketchel hit, the fact that he was able to drop Jack Johnson, heavyweight champion at the time. And he had already by then beaten multiple Hall of Famers. I think his only loss at the time of the Johnson fight was to Joe Jeanette by DQ, which he had later avenged. Ketchel, I think all but 3 of his wins were by knockout. He's credited for being the first fighter who was a switch hitter. And not only just a switch hitter, but, according to what I've read in multiple different outlets over the years, is that Ketchel was able to actually switch stances mid-combination, and that made it almost impossible for a lot of these cruder fighters of the day to deal with. Now, I can only imagine what, if Ketchel was take his power and that ability, what would have, go ahead 75, 80 years and have an Angelo Dundee or Mandy Stewart working with him, developing a strategy, and then, putting in some sort of, an amateur career behind him. How good could Stanley Ketchel, possibly be? Of course, it's just, a speculation. As fans, we love to imagine such things. But, Marvin Hagler, who was considered, and I stated this last week, sometimes he was considered actually the king of the 4 kings. He fought the very elite in an era that many consider the most elite era in boxing, period. And as for power, I'm pretty sure that John Mugabe, Tommy Hearns, and Benny Briscoe were most likely comparable to the power of Ketchel. So, other than the fact that Hagler, as I stated before, he has shown to have a problem with fighters who not only could punch, but they could box, I believe that, Hagler would beat Ketchel after some rough moments and, being caught off guard and being surprised that this guy can, box that well and he hits as hard as he did.
This is a matchup that, to be honest with you, is the best one of all 3. And I say that because their records are so similar when you look at the percentages and the numbers. 78% knockout ratio for both fighters, 77.97 for Ketchel and 77.61 for Hagler. The thing that stands out to me with Ketchel, the era makes a big difference. When you look at those guys and there's a lot of them, like you mentioned, Hall of Famers. Philadelphia Jack O'Brien fought, and Billy Papke. They fought him multiple times. Sam Langford, the late great Sam Langford, losing to a newspaper decision. Now, for the fans out there don't know what that is, many states boxing was illegal, so they wouldn't render a decision, but the newspapers would score a fight, and they would put who they thought would win. Now there's an asterisk next to that, because if you punch up a fighter's name on BoxRec, what BoxRec did was they would go and take the major newspapers that reported the fight and took their decisions and averaged them out to put who won or lost the newspaper decision. So that's what you see in BoxRec when you punch up the record. If there's a loss by a newspaper decision, well, that's because there were more newspaper reporters that scored it that way than ones that scored it the opposite way, which I don't know is that accurate when you think about it, Dax, because a hometown or close to hometown reporter is always going to sway and lean towards their guy. So it was unfortunate that there was so many of those.
Judges do the same thing, so why should they have
they're worse. They're worse. But when I look at this fight between Hagler and Stanley Ketchel, I really, again, similar to Greb, I don't know if I could put a win on either one of their records. I think Stanley Ketchel, might have been. You bring up an interesting point about the era and about the training techniques. I think that would have benefited Hagler, but very similar. I don't know. I mean, who would you pick to have won?
Like I said, because of the fact that Hagler fought in an era where fighters were more advanced, their styles weren't as crude, and I would think that, and it's hard to fathom that any other middleweight outside of maybe Golovkin hit harder than Briscoe, hit harder than Hearns, hit harder than any of those other John Mugabe or any of those guys. So I would edge it to Hagler. But like I was stating, I wonder exactly if he was able to fight in a later era and have trainers that were able to develop his natural skill sets along his natural abilities in terms of power and being able to switch stances like that mid-combination, then it might be a different story. But, as of right now, you'd have to go with Hagler. But oddly enough, Marvin Hagler, out of that group, he's the only one that didn't die a tragic, sad death. I mean, yes, it's sad, don't give me yes, Marvin died, it's sad that Marvin died, but I'm talking about, Greb, he dies on the operating table after a car accident. He had the glass eye, and Ketchel was shot by a guy on the farm that was jealous over a girl, and as we stated before, Carlos Monzon dies on his way back to prison after being out on furlough for good behavior.
Yeah, I know. The Stanley Ketchel story is crazy with him having the affair with the wife. The husband comes back, shoots him. They plan it. It was like they were trying to rob him. They rifle through his clothes. She ends up turning on him. He ends up coming back. They both serve their time and get out. The husband and wife. And he ends up becoming an oil truck deliverer, and ends up delivering oil to that same house years later, which is, talk about strange.
Well, he died at 24, so he wasn't that old when he died.
No, I know. I'm talking about the guy who shot him.
Oh, the guy who shot him.
The guy who shot him served his time, right, for the murder.
Oh, and then he became an
oil truck driver, and he's delivering oil to the same place, to the same farm and stuff, which is pretty ironic. But
when Alex gets on, just go back to Greb for a minute. Didn't Greb fight and win a large portion of his career with problems in one eye where he didn't see very well at all?
That's what I was telling you.
Or was he totally blind in the eye?
He went blind. His eye was he claims that the eye was injured with remember, they had thumbs in the gloves. He claimed, and he did have some surgeries to correct the eye. That's the guy who was literally blind in the eye and begged. He used to fake the eye examination operations. He eventually had the eye removed and was wearing a glass eye. So, I mean, this was a guy that was literally blind in one eye when he was fighting. Not as bad as Sam Langford, who was literally blind in his corner. He's going, I can't see my opponent. Just direct me. Just point me in the right direction. And we'll go after. And incidentally, Ketchel fought Langford, and a lot of the Hall of Famers that he fought. Again, we're picking these guys that are extremely hard to really pick a winner. Again, the freakness of Stanley Ketchel and the fact that he was 24 years old, putting up against Hagler. I'm going to whip out here, and I can't pick a winner. I'm going to lean on Alex with title bout, but I want to lean towards Marvin Hagler in this fight because of exactly what you brought up with the technology and the improved training techniques. But then again, Hagler trained the old way. He was the guy chopping wood and running in work boots. So. Interesting.
Yeah. It's not the training. I'm talking about the delivery method of punches and so on.
No, I got you.
Not in training in terms of cardio.
No, but
you know how.
You mean the train? You mean
by how fighters learned how you pick a little bit more, move more, move their head a little more.
Right. You're referring more to the trainers and the technique.
Yeah, that's why I mentioned, if he was with somebody like an Angelo Dundee or a Manny Stewart, who was able to take his natural abilities, imagine what type of fighter he would have been if he had such advantages.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Interesting. Well, I'm going to see what Title Bat has to say, and I'm glad you joined us and gave us your thoughts, and we'll be looking forward to that same stuff next week. I'm sure we'll find something to talk about next week, you think?
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of things. Boxing is, starting to roll well right now. The Nationals are actually going on down in Louisiana. So, USA Boxing. So, that's a good sign that USA Boxing is back. So, boxing around the whole world. And live attendance gates down in Texas. Give it another month or two and we should be, rolling full load.
Well, we got some fights on tap next week. Derek Chisora is fighting Joseph Parker. Love that fight.
How do you not love Derek Chisora?
No, and then Bivol, we were talking about him last week. He's on that card. He's not, in my opinion, not in a barn burner fight, but he's got to fight somebody. He's fighting Craig Richards. And then Sandy Lara is taking on Thomas Lamanna, which shocks me that that's for the vacant title. No disrespect to Lamanna, but Cornflake, I don't know if he deserves to be in the same ring with Lara, but it is the W. And, you have those fights, the Zone and Fox. And one last thing I want to ask you, who made the decision to make Andy Ruiz and Chris Arreola a pay-per-view? Is this a failed fight, 100%? Because, Andy Ruiz, come on. We all loved him, especially when he beat Anthony Joshua. He's the smiling guy. He's that overweight fighter that, has hand speed that's unbelievable. And he's fighting Chris Arreola, the perennial tough guy who also can't keep away from food. He's made it very clear that there's no safe taco stand when he's around. And then they're putting this on pay-per-view, and they're going up against a Lara fight. Granted, he's not exactly an exciting fighter, but Derek Chisora and Joseph Parker and the return of Bivol, it's going to be a tough one for them to make out financially on that fight.
Yeah, I don't know who made that decision. And who's carrying that?
What?
Pay-per-view.
I don't know. I know
is it like on a streaming? Is it on a streaming service or it's
on
a cable network?
I think it's going to be on the cable network. I think it's going to be like an in-demand type pay-per-view. If it was a streaming service, no matter what it is, it's a tough fight. If it was on regular TV or very easy to watch, I could see them because you could always rewatch the Zone. And I could see people actually picking that fight over the Lara fight, only because Lara's known for not being too exciting, and Ruiz and Chris Arreola are. it's a tough one. It's a tough competition that they're up against for viewers.
Yeah, I'm just saying the streaming service because sometimes depending on which one, you can get a membership even for a month for $4.95. Not 70, not even not 10, not 20, not 30. I mean for $4.95, I can see a lot of people actually watching it. The only thing, and I had this conversation yesterday with somebody just to close out about Andy Ruiz Jr. No matter what Andy Ruiz Jr. does, he's never going to be able to make like the cruiserweight limit. He's never going to be a guy that has a body that you are jealous of. But Andy Ruiz Jr., when he's in shape, don't take the rematch against Anthony Joshua because Andy Ruiz Jr. just was living up and still celebrating, I think, the night before the fight, the win from the first time out. But when Andy Ruiz Jr. is in shape, and considering how good of an amateur fighter he was, Andy Ruiz Jr. is a problem for anybody. So I actually think Chris Arreola is going to be easy work for him.
Chris Arreola has always been a tough guy. I've always loved.
I mean, not now. I mean, this is a very shop-worn Chris Arreola.
No, I know, and I've always loved Chris Arreola. But he's a gatekeeper now, and this is he should. I mean, to be honest with you, Andy Ruiz, this should be a showcase fight for him because if it's not, then we'll never see Andy Ruiz at the form that he was when he beat AJ.
Oddly enough, Chris Arreola was kind of Andy Ruiz before Andy Ruiz in terms of the excitement and the build, and just Andy Ruiz is just a better technical fighter. But if you understand what I'm saying, Chris Arreola never was a hard body. He was never a guy where you look at and be like, I want to be built just like he is. But Chris Arreola, when, as you stated, he was always exciting. So
there's no question about that. All right, my man. Thanks for joining us, and we'll look forward to you next week.
All right, everybody, enjoy the rest of your day.
That's Dax Kahn. You can check him out on our website. He's the guy that keeps that alive and well. So, in any event, interesting stuff for sure with this discussion on who would have won, should we have fought. And speaking of winning, make sure that you get yourself. My man Kenny was in the chat room before. Make sure you get yourself a bottle of the Kenny Bear's barbecue rub. It is second to none. I'll tell you, you could put it on anything. I like it on pizza. Okay. So you can go ahead with the jokes. Italian eating pizza. Surprise, surprise. I got you. But trust me when I tell you, it's good on anything. But like I admitted to Kenny in the chat room, my new favorite right now is the new blackened seasoning that he's got. Man, I had it last night. And I shit you not. I made this gigantic hamburger and I put it on that, and man, it was good. His all-purpose salt is really good as well. But whatever you do, get something. Visit southerngourmetspice.com. That's southerngourmetspice.com. And make sure you tell him Billy C sent you. Demand a Billy C discount. But joining us right now is my man, Alex Papali. Good morning, Alex.
Good morning, Billy C. How are you?
Good. You're still in your feety pajamas? Did you get a good night's sleep? I mean, bragging that you're up till 10 o'clock every night. Come on, man. I'm already waking up. I'm waking up. My morning is starting at 10 o'clock already, so...
I know you're like a whole day ahead of everybody.
I don't know what it is. I should be living in Europe, but
yeah, it's like you live in Gibraltar all the time.
Exactly. That's right. Gibraltar's I'm on their time. I love that fight. I like the car. DAZN is really. They've kicked it up a notch. I mean, I don't see any other network really competing with them, and no, they're not paying me to say that. It is what it is. But interesting topics today. Marvelous Marvin Hagler going against the three names that we kept bringing up. Now, just so you know, and I've been mentioning this during the show, I'm not including Sugar Ray Robinson. I think he's in a class by himself. And ironically enough, BoxRec, has Sugar Ray Robinson as a middleweight ranked number 1. And the rest of the rankings kind of surprised me. Number 2 is B-Hop. Now, I'm not taking anything away from Bernard Hopkins, but I'm not so sure we could put him in the conversation with a Hagler being and well, let me read the top 10. Sugar Ray Robinson, Bernard Hopkins at number 2, Harry Greb, who we're going to talk about at number 3, Triple G at number 4, who does not belong in this list. No one loves Triple G more than me, but he doesn't belong in this list. Randy Turpin is at number 5. I gotta believe the main reason is because of the win over Sugar Ray Robinson. Hagler's at number 6. Marcel Thill, which is a forgotten heavyweight, 106 wins, 20 losses, 10 draws, fought in the 20s and early 30s. He's at number 7. Monzon at number 8. A guy we should have included in this, Charlie Burley at number 9, and Nino Benvenuti at number 10. So those are your top 10 fighters. Stanley Ketchel isn't in the discussion all the way until, well, Mickey Walker's at number 5. Wait a minute. Do I see? I didn't even look at this until just now. Do you know that they don't even have Stanley Ketchel in the top 25?
Yeah, I don't really know how BoxRec does their all-time greats.
By a point system. It's a point system that they have come up with. So apparently some of the opponents, and I didn't mean to cut you off, but some of the opponents that he faced, I guess, don't count. You know, some of those no-namers like Philadelphia Jack O'Brien, Sam Langford, Billy Papke, so maybe it was the era of newspaper decisions, and
to have Hopkins and Triple G that high makes me think that it's sort of modern, favors the modern guys. However, Marcel Thiel, for him to be that high, that's a little weird over, because even Mickey Walker, if you go by Ibro's latest all-time rating poll, which I was part of and was finished on September 30th, 2019, the way they have it is Greb number 1, Ray Robinson second. See, I disagree with that. My vote actually had Ray Robinson first because I think Ray Robinson would outbox Greb. But if Greb made it into a firefight, that's the thing. That these guys are unbelievable fighters. So what separates them is probably not much. But Ibro has Greb, Ray Robinson, Carlos Monzon, Hagler at 4, then Mickey Walker at 5, then Stanley Ketchel at 6, then Bob Fitzsimmons, then Bernard Hopkins, then Charlie Burley, and 10th Marcel Cerdan. So I kind of like that. I definitely like that all-time greatest list better than BoxRec's. But the guy I just was trying to run, I'm not sure if it finished, was Mickey Walker, even though we didn't talk. Yeah, I did finish that. Wow, see, and all three. Well, we'll get to that. But all three of these guys they all finish similarly because we are talking about greats fighting greats.
Well, Mickey Walker, I'm with you. And the only explanation I'll tell you about Ibro is that Ray Robinson is more regarded as the best welterweight that ever laced on a pair of gloves. The problem is there's no footage. There's there's a lot of that era when Ray Robinson was fighting as a welterweight that we just don't have. So a lot of people refer to him as a middleweight, but he was really a welterweight, retired and came back as a middleweight. He was similar to Sugar Ray Leonard in terms of coming back and everything else. And speaking of Leonard's not on this list either. Michael Lunn is
same deal at welterweight. He is.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm saying on the list for BoxRec.
Oh, BoxRec? Oh, wow, that is weird.
Yeah, he's not even on the list. Emil Griffith is ahead of Fulmer. Jermaine Taylor is ahead of Tony Zale. Michael Nunn is up there. But the one that really gets me, as you mentioned, Mickey Walker. They have Kelly Pavlik ahead of him.
Yeah. See, I don't know how they're doing the points, but yeah, that doesn't.
And they have Fred Ospitali at number 15. He was more of a light heavyweight, wasn't he?
I thought he was lighter, but I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean those are strange.
Anyway, we can box rec is box rec, but Alex Papalian title bout is Alex Papalian title bout. So let's go with Stanley Ketchel first. I did him last. I've kind of wimped out, Alex. I was not able to pick a winner between Stanley Ketchel and the Marvelous One. And no disrespect to Marvin Hagler, but Stanley Ketchel, they were very similar in size and stature and everything else. And a comment that I made, I don't know if you were listening, and I think that the thing about Marvin is he fought as much as you gave him. So if you were throwing punches nonstop at him, he would be throwing punches nonstop at you. And it would be interesting to have seen the Harry Greb fight with those two. Who would have succumbed, all of these fighters, with the exception of Monzon, because he was in an era that was more structured, fought bigger guys on a regular basis for paychecks, and Stanley Ketchel was one of them. How did Title Bout see it? Well, first, before you tell me that, how do you feel it would have went?
I think all of these matches would be, must-see bouts. These are really, Titan versus Titan type matches. And I think the thing about them is the only, if we're the way I put them in, the way you could set things in title bout is, these are all guys that are rated at middleweight, mostly, because, that's one of the things you could do for like somebody like Mickey Walker. You could change it, for if you want to make him as a welterweight, whatever. But all these guys, their primary listing is middles. So that's where they're strongest, and most of them, that's where they did much of their fighting. A couple of them, like Ketchel, could hit and slug with bigger men. Ketchel, one of his best fights, I was going over his record again, and he fought I think it was a 6-rounder with Sam Langford. That must have been an absolute scorcher of a fight. And it's a no decision.
Newspaper, yeah.
Yeah, so you'd have to go and read about, what it was like. But it's considered a draw. I mean, that's arguably one of the best fighters there ever was. So, yeah, I mean, all of these guys could do everything. But the thing that's interesting about them is that they were all kind of similar. Well, some of them were similar, almost identical in height. And I think Greb and Hagler are the two that match up the most identically. Monzon's the tallest at 5'11", at like 5'11 and a half. Ketchel is 5'9", just like Marvin. But Ketchel could, I don't know, maybe you could argue that Ketchel was a little faster. Now, one thing I did in this game is you could set the rounds and you could set the rules. I use the modern rules in the sense that I use 12 rounders. If any listeners have a problem with that, go ahead and send us an email, and I could run them with 15 rounders.
Considering Ketchel was in 20-round fights on a regular basis, and also only win by knockout type fights, he was very close to Hagler. I mean, they had this almost identical records in terms of total fights. They were identical in their knockout ratios at 78%. Size. Both of them were very, very similar. The big difference with Hagler, even though, and Dax brought up a great point, even though he trained the old style, he was trained by trainers that knew more about the evolution of the sport, whereas Stanley Ketchel did not have that. Plus, Stanley Ketchel only lived to 24 years old.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of those, his story is a great story. It's one of those things, like, you're talking about guys in that era that have stories that would make for great HBO series. And I think it's Herb Goldman, I remember in one of I think it's the Unforgivable Blackness documentary, where he mentions how Stanley Ketchel died after being shot in the back by the estranged husband of the woman who was cooking him breakfast.
Yeah.
And that's just such it's like, wow, I want to know more of that.
Yeah. Yeah, but that story didn't end there. I was talking about, I mean, first of all, she lied. It was almost like a setup. They rifled through his pockets. They were robbing him. They thought he had all this money on him, and he didn't. He had like $20 on him or something like that. And she lied at the trial, then came clean. They both did time, and then ironically enough, they both were freed. They ended up being out living a life of freedom, and he became an oil truck driver who would deliver oil regularly to the same house that he shot Stanley Ketchel in. I mean, you're right. That would make a great story. I mean, who wouldn't want to watch that? And by the way, was it scrambled eggs or fried eggs? What kind of eggs was he eating? I
think it was hash browns.
Yeah.
Maybe some of that Kenny Bears on it.
Yeah, that would have changed everything. If he would have put some of the Kenny Bears on there, maybe they would have offered the estranged husband some, and he would have said, you know what, after eating this, maybe I don't need to shoot nobody.
That's right. But see, that's the thing that we never saw Marvin Hagler move up to light heavyweight, which is something I always would have been interested to see. It would have been interesting to see maybe Hagler Hearns 2 at 175. But Stanley Ketchel was a guy who did go in there against the big men. And like you said, he even scores a knockdown against Jack Johnson that Jack didn't like very much.
But his weight wasn't the same. I mean, his weight didn't change.
He was like 169 with rocks in his pocket.
Right, exactly. So he maintained it. It was a different era. You could fight anybody bigger at any time. You just couldn't go down low. And you know what? I want to comment on your 175 Tommy Hearns and Hagler. You see, I'm shocked that you said that, because that's what makes Hagler so great. Hagler, the last time I saw him, I bet you he weighed 160 pounds. You know what I mean? I mean, this guy was a middleweight through and through. He never had problems making weight or anything like that. I mean, he stayed in the same shape that he fought in until his last day on Earth. And I've always given him credit for that.
No, you're absolutely right, and I think that there is that sort of, that's one of the things that makes him such a gladiator and a disciplined fighter, as he stayed in one weight class. Not to say that guys who move up, are taking a shortcut or something, but the body does get bigger and heavier, so it does become harder to make that weight. And so, that's part of it. And Marvin never did that, to his credit. And I know that does sound, especially for a guy with Marvin on his arm, that's sacrilegious.
Yeah, I know. What are you talking? Who is this?
On Sunday, what am I doing?
Yeah, I know. I mean, you're going to hell straight. You're going there first. But
but yes, okay. So with Stanley Ketchel, so I put these guys in there for 12 rounders, and yeah, like you and Dax were mentioning, the modern era, you can't help it. Nutrition was better, the consistency, and that idea that just like we didn't know smoking was bad for you. The era that Ketchel because we're talking like 1910 when Ketchel was fighting. So yes, there's very different things that happened compared to a guy's health and just physical well-being. So you would think that the modern guys do have an advantage in that sense. However, and when you listen to the results, maybe this game thinks so too. So when they fight the first time, this is Marvelous Marvin Hagler versus Stanley Ketchel. Hagler wins by 12th round TKO, stops him with 47 seconds of the 12th. It's a fight that was very busy. The total punch stat had Marvelous Marvin Hagler throwing 728 and landing 315. Ketchel was busier, throwing 849 but missing a lot more, landing only 251. And that was the only knockdown, was in the 12th round when Hagler put him down. And he did make it up, but the referee stopped it. And that's one of the rules that I do set it, because you could have it set by doctor can stop fight, referee can stop the fight. In most states right now, and I believe it is the Association of Boxing Commission rules, that only the referee can stop the fight. However, as we've seen that many times, a doctor will say, "Hey, referee, I think you should stop the fight." "Oh, okay, I'll stop the fight." So it kind of works that way. Right. But that's one of the rules. You could set it in the game, and that you're never saved by the bell. And that was something what you had mentioned about that Cheeseman stoppage. I noticed BoxRec, at least so far, there's no official time. It just says 11th round KO. So if they announced it 3:10, they haven't posted it yet. I wonder if they're looking into that.
It can't be, right?
Because that's weird to me. I don't think I've ever seen that either. I think you see like 3 minutes.
Right. They stop it at 3 minutes. They don't start tapping into the minute in between. It happened right at the bell, and then the 10-second count. So whoever reported, I mean, that's what's being reported on the websites, 3 minutes and 10 seconds of the round, which is not correct. It should just be 3 minutes,
Yeah, exactly. I think so, because I think that's the thing where boxing is sort of in this, especially a knockdown, sort of exists outside of time, because it's not seconds, first of all, it's the count. It's the referee's count. And in this case, it was almost, I think the commentator, who was that, Paul Smith, had a point that there was not even really a need for that count.
There wasn't. He was done. It was over. There was no need for that count.
Oh, that fight was pretty amazing. I can't believe the amount of right hands he took. What was it, in the 4th round? Mamma mia. He was getting slammed. That was a really, really exciting fight, but the headache Metcalf must have today, Lord.
Well, he had his moments, and I'll tell you, that 3 minutes 10-second reporter, it just goes to show you the lack of knowledge. I have a really good email I'm going to be reading later, but the lack of knowledge of the people involved with the sport. That's why I love when somebody says, you don't know boxing. They tell me, okay, maybe my opinion isn't the same, but I think I know boxing, I mean, anyway.
I think a lot of times what you will see is if there's a knockdown with like 1 second left in the round, the timekeeper will not ring the bell. The referee will do the count, finish the mandatory 8. If the fighter's okay, then when he cleans off the gloves and is about to wave, then the timekeeper rings it. So those 8 seconds sort of existed nowhere.
Exactly.
In this sort of they existed beyond the round. But yeah, I've never seen someone count that as time. Because even when somebody gets stopped inside the rest period, they usually score last round completed, I believe.
No, if they quit on their stool in between rounds, it's the new round, right?
I think it's usually like, say you don't come out for the 5th, it would say TKO by 5, I think, or 4th round TKO. That's a good question.
No, I think you're not able to answer the bell. The round is over, so the 4th round is over. Now you're in between the beginning of the 5th round. So if you don't come out for the 5th round, it's a TKO at 0 of the 5th round. I'm pretty sure. I could be wrong on that, but I'm not wrong on. You're right about the suspended time, because it's not a 10-second count; it's a 10 count. But anyway,
right.
How did
that's where the whole Mike Tyson Buster Douglas thing is.
He was robbed. He was robbed that fight. I'm telling you, he knocked out Douglas.
That was Don King reaching for straws, Yeah.
But hey, just jumping back onto the BoxRec, who I was surprised wasn't in the top 25 as middleweights, and I know people are going to disagree with me because of his record if they punch him up now, but Iran Barkley. Iran Barkley was a middleweight that was a monster, and during his era, even though he wasn't there at the top that long, and he became a journeyman or whatever, he was a journeyman, but I mean, some of the vicious he was a monster. He was Carlos Monzon size, as a middleweight.
very big for a middleweight.
I could never believe that he was only 160 pounds. I mean, he looked like a heavyweight in there, you know?
Oh, and when you see him today, he's a big, formidable guy, even at his older age. Yeah, and I shout out to him because, you know how the kids give the shout out, Billy C?
Yeah.
Because I think he just had a hard time with COVID-19, and I think he's recuperating the last I've seen on social media.
Well, you're not going to keep him down, that's for sure.
Right.
But all right, Stanley Ketchel, Marvin Hagler, the first fight, Hagler wins, TKO,
So
12th
Hagler
round.
wins, and then when they fight 100 times, Hagler gets the best of them. He wins 60 of the fights. Ketchel wins 29. They draw 11 times, and Hagler has 29 stoppages of Stanley Ketchel. Now, in Ketchel's 29 victories, 12 of them are by stoppage of Hagler. Now, that when you get results like that, you don't know, what those stoppages look like, if they're full count-outs. Because we're talking about, Hagler never was knocked out. Was knocked down once dubiously by Juan Domingo Roldan, who's somebody who did pass away from COVID-19 this past year. But, okay, so that is the Ketchel. So we have Hagler
Beating Ketchel.
Beats Ketchel. Now versus Monzon. So like you said, Monzon, very big, formidable guy, can box. The only losses in his whole career came very, very early in his career, and then just dominant as a middleweight champion. In fact, he was the one who had the record for a very long time of the most successful defenses. He was, he didn't get tired, threw lots and lots of punches, could beat any style, could even walk down and stop boxers and movers. And I think that's where I think that Hagler would have a little difficulty with him, only that if you had one knock on a prime Marvin Hagler, is that he did tire a bit. But we're talking in 15-round fights, because the first, that's the only reason you could maybe argue that there was, I think Hagler should have gotten the first fight with Antiformo. But that was a draw, and one of the knocks on Marvin was that he tired a bit. He probably tired a little bit against Duran.
Hey, two things. Wait, let me...
what's his name? Monzon didn't.
Alex, let me interrupt you. Two things. Dax is straightening me out here. He said it is counted like you suggested. If a fighter doesn't come out for the fifth round, he gets a TKO RTD of the fourth. So I appreciate that correction from our very own Dax Kahn. And the other comment I want to make before you give the results is I'm shocked. I'm utterly shocked. I'm actually appalled that you wouldn't mention that Carlos Monzon's life shouldn't be a movie. I mean, come on, that's got every element in it. It's got the wildlife, the fast lane, the drugs, the alcohol, the women, the beatings of the women, the murder, the death by race car, racing back to the special treatment he got in jail, doing his minimal time. He gets 11 years for murder, so I mean, come on, tell me that's not a Hollywood movie. And he was Mr. Hollywood. That's what really caused him to go down that path. He loved the limelight. He loved it. Yeah,
yes, a very strikingly handsome guy who, was just a nasty person, especially, like you said, his relationship with women, and violent man outside of the ring, which is very, as much as, that's sort of a stereotype about boxers. As we know, there's just like there's all kinds of different people, there's all different kinds of boxers.
Hey, too. He picked women that were just like him. She shot him twice in the arm, once in the arm and once in the shoulder. So, I mean,
Well, and I think, hasn't there been a movie or a Netflix series? I think Dax was mentioning that. I haven't seen it, but I heard there was something on Netflix about Monzon, or maybe it was Showtime that did it.
I don't recall, but I would love to see it. And I'll tell you, did you know that we're jumping all over the place? But that's the basis of this show. Do you know that there was a comic book series and followed by a cartoon series on Jack Johnson? Did you know that?
Really?
Yeah, more modern. It came out probably 6-7 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, like some crazy stuff. I had a couple of issues, or preliminarily.
I got to see that.
Yeah.
I have the children's book that was about Jack Johnson. That's pretty good.
No, this made him like a superhero.
Wow.
Oh yeah, he was it was good. I'll dig up the info, but all right, how did Monzon with Marvelous Hagler?
Okay, so now, like you and Dax mentioned, the idea that somebody's taller than Marvin, it didn't matter with Tommy Hearns. However, the computer makes it seem as if it was more of a boxing match, and Hagler just plain made him miss more. Hagler wins, unanimous decision. The scores are 117-113. Hagler, 116-115 Hagler, and only one judge had it 118-113 for Monzon. And that even includes Hagler going down in getting put down in the fourth, but it must have been so brief that one judge actually, or the judge, you can't have a great battle without a little controversy. And one judge actually scored that round 10-9 for Monzon, even though Hagler was down. So it didn't matter. Hagler still wins a split decision. And then when they fight 100 times, Hagler gets the better again. 57 victories for Marvelous Marvin, 21 wins for Carlos Monzon. They draw 22 times. So even the computer's like, I don't know. These guys are so good. And then Hagler does stop him 13 times of his 57 wins. And in Monzon's 21 victories, he scored 3 KOs of Marvelous Marvin. So, yeah, I mean, it is the computer. I don't know. I think these results, I don't think I like them, because I think that's the thing about these, the chins of these guys that we're putting in here. It makes sense. And by accident, when I ran, I didn't get the stats on it yet, but I put Mickey Walker in there against Hagler for 100 times. And by accident, I clicked Michael Walker. And when I looked at the results, it was 97 victories for Hagler and 2 for Michael Walker. I was like, that can't be right. And then I realized I put the wrong guy in there. So the computer, there's definitely a difference in who you're putting in. This computer game is pretty cool.
That's the only fight, and please don't hold it against me, Alex, but that's the only fight I thought that Hagler would have lost against Monzon, and I would have. I thought that because of the size. I think that Hagler, his style was, you give me 2, I'm giving you 3 back. I think Monzon was similar, and I just think the size would have overcame. I think that Monzon would have been much bigger on fight night, not only height wise but just all around. And I think Hagler would have been given it his all and would have run out. I don't know, but I guess
I kind of agree with you. Now remember, I did set these for 12 rounds. So that could be something. I mean, I could do that and run them for 15, because maybe in 15 rounds, 115 rounders, Monzon does get the better of them, because I agree with you. I think it would come down to a late round type struggle. And we see that now when you're battling 2 fighters that are really, really good, and there's just a little shade of difference between them. It really does come down to rounds 10, 11, and 12. And that's why, in a way, and the other thing that's frustrating is when you have like great bouts like that, like a Golovkin Canelo, or Teofimo Lopez Lomachenko. it's almost like those fights should be 15-rounders because sometimes those fights take a while to get going, especially in the case of Lomachenko. But and then there's such little difference between the two guys. It's like, give us an odd number of rounds, number one, and also a little more when they're really tired, because that's when the differences really show, is in those last couple of rounds. And I think that's where Monzon would have probably won big in those final rounds against Marvin.
And the only reason why I say that isn't because I felt that Monzon was in better shape than Hagler throughout his career. I just think that Hagler would have tried to have kept up with Monzon and ran through some of his fuel earlier in the fight.
Right. And like you said, the size would become a bigger thing later going, because this big guy is leaning on you. Yep. You're pressing him off. You're tangling up. So I agree with you. Of these results, those are the ones I think I kind of have a little difficulty with. But here comes Greb.
Yeah. I'm really curious to see how this one goes, because Greb, they didn't call him, the Pittsburgh Windmill for nothing.
Yeah, and I mean, when you talk about great fighters, I mean, this is like one of the ultimate badasses, because in terms of the quality of opponents, as you say, Billy C, he fought
everybody.
And he was built most like Hagler in the sense they were exact same size. The thing that was interesting, they had contrasting styles, which would have made this, contrasting philosophies. Hagler, we already talked about, when he's in that interview with Johnny Carson, he says how he goes into isolation. He likes to put himself in jail. No women. He goes into lockdown. Greb, he liked sex before fights, sometimes maybe in the locker room. And not only that, one of the things that Greb would do, you have all these great stories, that in order to swing the odds on himself, he would go out and drink ginger ale, but stumble around with women in bars publicly, hoping to swing the odds on his fight, and then he'd bet on himself and go and beat the guy the next night to, get a little extra cashish.
Yeah, I know. So yeah, he did that. He did that a lot. I mean, I remember one story that he did that, and literally was staggering around, fell into a cab, or even had somebody put him in a cab, or the story goes, and then he comes back, and people are like, there's no way he's going to be 100% tomorrow. But, what a character he was. But
that's pretty cool. That's the thing. I love stories like that, because that's part of boxing is trickeration,
You can't get away with that today. Somebody would have a phone on you saying, there's bubbles in that scotch. I don't know, But anyway, how did he make out?
Okay, so when they fight, it's another thriller. And Hagler comes away with a close decision, split decision. All three scores were 116, were 113. 2 for Hagler that way, and then 1 the same score, but the other way for Greb. When we look at the punch stat, it was razor thin, and actually it's a case of Hagler's punches maybe being more quality punches, because Hagler threw less and landed less. Hagler threw 803 and landed 408. Greb threw 871 and landed 431. So really a thriller of a fight, exciting fight. And then when they fight 100 times, this is the most evenly matched of all three guys. But Hagler gets the better of him. 53 victories for Hagler, 40 for Harry Greb, 7 draws. And the Marvelous One stops Harry Greb 13 times. And out of Greb's 40 victories, he stops Hagler 11 times.
Interesting. I wonder how much the modern era has played into those results. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm not letting go of some of the guys who built this sport. And I loved Hagler. Actually, there were times I hated him, but I grew to love him. I just, against these three guys, it's hard to, and the margins of victory with the game. And I would have thought Harry Greb might have been one of the easier wins for him because of the size and because Harry Greb comes at you with so much. The accuracy isn't there. I could have seen Hagler with the counter punching ability and landing a shot or two, and then considering the weakness in the eye, which obviously we're assuming that both in their prime in the game, but I don't know. The Stanley Ketchel fight would have been one I would have loved. I would have loved to have seen all three, but I would have loved to have seen that only because Ketchel, we never got to see what Ketchel was really like. I mean, he was so accomplished at 24, I mean, you would have had to assume that over the next 2 or 3 years, the guy would have blossomed into something elite, and it's strange. It's strange.
Yeah, I did want to say that if you look at the Mickey Walker results did finish, and Hagler dominates him, just barely. I'm sorry, he has 53 victories over Mickey Walker. Walker has 41, and they draw 6 times. He stops Mickey Walker 14 times, and Walker stopped him 19 times. So again, all these guys we're talking about great battling great. So yeah, they're pretty close. But you're right. I mean, I think in terms of the matchups, I think I'd like to see the most, and I think would be, and maybe it's because they're both closer in actual era, is Hagler Monzon. And I think also because Hagler did have rivalries with South American fighters. So I think I can almost picture it. I can picture the press conferences. I could picture the weigh-in and stuff. And the way that bout played out on the computer, I really enjoyed that one. And I don't know. I think that that was one of the guys that I think, especially towards the end when Hagler was so close to tying and breaking his record, I think he thought of him as one of his peers, And like you had said earlier, I think that's one of the reasons why Sugar Ray Robinson, at welterweight, he was peerless. There was just no doubt about it. But we don't have that footage to see. He had so many TV classics at middleweight. So, and it's amazing to think that's not his best. He won the title 5 times.
I know, but there were much better there was more known dance partners at middleweight at that time, Yeah. But you can't go. I appreciate all of the title bout, great stuff. But I want to get into the BoxRec ratings are crazy. We went over the middleweight, but the heavyweight is even worse. No disrespect to these guys, but Joe Louis, number 1. I could see that. Ali, number 2. I could see that. Vladimir Klitschko, I could even see him at number 3, maybe. But Rocky Marciano down to number 4, I would have thought he was up higher. Sonny Liston at number 5, I like. Lennox Lewis at number 6. Gene Tunney at number 7. I think the value of that Gene Tunney is ranked in the top 10 all-time heavyweights should go more towards the Greb situation, him fighting.
Are we at number 7 and you haven't said George Foreman yet?
No, George Foreman. So number 7, Gene Tunney. 8, Riddick Bowe. 9, Tyson. 10, Jimmy Bivens. I like seeing Bivens in here in the top 10. Evander Holyfield, number 11. Tyson Fury at number 12. Vitaly Klitschko at 13. Joe Frazier, 14. Holmes, 15. Floyd Patterson.
You're triggering me.
I know. Listen, Floyd Patterson, number 16. Johansson, number 17. Jersey Joe at number 18. Anthony Joshua, 19. Povetkin at number 20.
What?
and George Foreman at 21. They have him at 20, and then you keep going down. Believe it or not, they got
someone who made that list. Is it someone who accidentally stepped on a grill?
I don't know, but look, George Foreman grill. But Bob Pastor, number 22, Nikolai Valuev, number 23. I mean, come on, please. I mean, he was a big guy, but number 23 in the top 50 fighters, heavyweights of all time. Deontay Wilder, number 24. Are you kidding me?
Have we not said Larry Holmes yet?
No, Larry Holmes was number 15. Elmer Violent Ray at number 27, which I like that he's in the top 30. But what I don't like is Jack Dempsey is at number 30. You know, John Ruiz, number 32. Eddie Machin, number 33.
Oh, my God.
Yes, Kenny Norton's all the way down at number 38. You got David Tua and Chris Bird ahead of Kenny Norton. I mean, Oliver McCall at number 42. Hasim Rahman, number 44. I mean, come on. You know, Tomas Adamek at number 50. So, I mean, these, you know, I love, the reason why I'm bringing them up is because I love when these young boxing fans start throwing box rec like it's fact. I can't accept a lot of those rankings. We've done the rankings here many, many times. But anyway, I hope you...
that makes me wonder if that's some kind of algorithm that puts them in that order. What are you scoring that lets a Jimmy Bivens get above a George Foreman?
Well, they do a point system, and they claim that it's based on the victories and your the people you beat, who their points were. So I don't know. I think the era of news
that be looked at, because that's something wrong.
Well, the era of like newspaper decisions, which Jack Dempsey would have fallen into, is also something that they probably they probably don't factor in. But a couple of questions I want to get your thoughts on. Mike Tyson. They were, in the beginning of the week, Mike Tyson actually said that the third fight with Evander Holyfield is a done deal. The very next day, his team said, nay, that's not a done deal. Apparently, it's not going to take place. Thriller, which was going to do it, Tyson said he's not doing it on Thriller. Whether they fight or not, my question to you is this. Could you possibly see Mike, this fight, it would be in the books as a exhibition, but could you see Evander Holyfield fighting this fight as an exhibition, or would this be Evander Holyfield at the most possible best he could be?
I think both of them would. I'm a little concerned about that one, because I think if both guys have a potential to take it way too seriously. But I think that's probably why they would want to make it. If it goes off the way the Roy Jones one did, sure, I'll watch.
But the Roy Jones Jr. fight, they call that a draw. That fight wasn't even close to a draw.
Well, but to me, it doesn't matter. You know, it
doesn't matter. But this fight would. If they,
well, that's the part that I think makes it, because I would want this to be fun. I wouldn't want this to become a wrestling spectacle or become too serious, where one of the guys does get mad and then do something horrible. I mean, I think if it's a chance to sort of exercise the demons of the last time they were in the ring together and just have a fun, 250-somethings going through the motions.
Alex, how could a fight between Holyfield and Tyson be fun for them? They would not. They would be looking to listen. You'd have to.
I think that's what it was with the Roy Jones. I think that was fun because I think that's the part that was sort of the phony part. Is the way that they scored it. We didn't need a score because it was clearly they weren't going full. It wasn't for real.
But this one would be, I think. I honestly believe it would be. I can't see. Maybe Tyson looks at it as fun and, hey, let's collect $10 million each. But I'm thinking Evander would not. Evander, listen.
I don't want it to be for real because I don't really think to me, that seems a little
dangerous.
I want these guys to, and we got a perfect example in these recent deaths, with Hagler going, dying the way a lot of people would want to die. 60-year-old man dies at home. He wasn't sick. Boom. You go out. No suffering. It's sad for your family. But think about it. About a week or two before Hagler passed away, Frankie Randall passed away. Frankie Randall was the first guy to beat officially Julio Cesar Chavez. Much of the second part of his life was spent in a convalescent home because of dementia from the sport. So this sport takes so much out of you. I don't want to see 50-year-olds go at it full force.
Well, then these 250,
they've already given so much.
These 250-something-year-olds shouldn't fight then. End of story. Tyson clearly was being easy.
But what if it was something just fun?
It can't be. It can't. That's my point. Evander wouldn't let it happen. Evander wouldn't let it be just fun. It can't. Listen.
You think they're too competitive that they would let it be fun?
It reminds me of Joe Frazier when Muhammad Ali, full blown, disease in play, is lighting the friggin' Olympic torch in Atlanta, and Joe Frazier's going, and they said, "Don't you feel for him?" He says, "If I was up there, I'd push him right into that flame." That's what it is with these two. These two, they can hug and say they're buddies now all they want, but that bell rings, and Evander Holyfield will be going after Mike Tyson. There is no question about it. And Mike Tyson, who knows what he would do? He's a different Mike Tyson than he was. I don't expect him to bite any ears off, but I do expect him to. I don't know. It is intriguing.
You don't see him getting a stool and bringing it over and helping him up onto the stool like Dillian White did to Povetkin yesterday.
No, I don't see Evander doing it for Tyson, and I don't know. I could see Tyson doing it for Evander if he knocked him out, but not the other way around.
But, I don't know, and I think that brings up the De La Hoya thing too. Is I don't want to see De La Hoya in a fight. I'd rather see him in an exhibition, spar with Jesse James Leija.
Well, what's he saying? Is he saying exhibition? He's been saying real fight.
Sure, but it's also Triller, so it makes me think that
exhibition.
That it's an exhibition.
The only
that's what Triller's going to do is have just these old codgers fight each other. Hey,
I wouldn't
mind it.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. But with Oscar, the only fight that I would like to really see him fight is against Floyd Mayweather. And the thing is I would like to see it a real fight. I don't want to see an exhibition. Let's face it. Oscar is trying to, get an extra 10 mil or 15 mil, whatever he wants. I don't want to see him fight the UFC fighter they're talking about. But
see, I would rather see him spar with Doc Vargas or with Felix Trinidad. I don't know if you saw the little clip. I just saw it this morning. Amanda Serrano had a great win this week, and in Puerto Rico on that Ring City USA. I don't know if you've been watching that show. That show's pretty good. I enjoy it. And Tito, she visited her and brought her flowers to congratulate her for the victory. And he looks good, so, hey, why not? Let's see. That was a rematch I always would have liked to see, and, it could be fun just to see the two of them spar like Roy and Mike did. What was it, 8 2-minute rounds?
Tito always looked good, except the night I saw him at Madison Square Garden as Don King's guest when he fought Roy Jones Jr. But in any event, one last question. Andy Ruiz against Chris Arreola next week as a pay-per-view, going up against Derek Chisora against Parker on DAZN, Dimitri Bivol against Craig Richards on DAZN, and then Sandy Lara is fighting for the vacant WBA middleweight title against Thomas Cornflake Lamana. You see anybody buying that over the other fights that are going to be available, or what?
Not this guy. Yeah, I don't know.
I like the fight. I just don't like that they're going against better ones.
Yeah, and I think that, well, I mean, you think Ruiz, Arreola, I mean, it could be fun, but it's not worth paying for.
No, I don't think it's worth paying for. It all depends on which Chris Arreola shows up. If a good in shape old Chris Arreola shows up and a good in shape under a new trainer Andy Ruiz shows up, it could be a showcase for Ruiz. But either way, pay-per-view is not going to do well, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't think so, and I don't think. I think. Well, for me, one of the things I did want to say is I think Chris Arreola. The only thing that I think was mildly entertaining about this was
the Coronas.
He had the ultimate troll when Andy Ruiz. I don't know if you saw that picture, but he took a picture of himself, a selfie like this, looking down at himself, like to show how fit he was. I don't know. That was sort of an interesting angle to choose. And so Chris Arreola the next day tweeted a picture of himself from that same angle, but he's on the toilet.
Oh, no. Oh, shit. No, I didn't see any of that.
It's just so funny. And I think that speaks to the quality of what you're getting in that card. But I think it could be fun, because that's the thing about heavyweights. All is forgiven when you get a good scrap. Yeah. And I think that has the potential of being a good scrap. There's a potential of a lot of flesh bouncing against slapping against each other.
Yeah, there is. There is.
Yeah, and somebody's going to leave with a concussion. Maybe both guys will leave with a concussion.
They're both going to leave with an appetite, I'll tell you that. So yeah.
Well, they come in with that too.
Right.
Well, and that's one of the things that and I don't know if you've seen some of the footage of Andy Ruiz. He's wearing one of those rubber suits. Kind of a weird thing for such a big guy, because that's more to get you down a couple pounds. I don't think he's got a problem sweating, and it's not a couple pounds that he has to be concerned about. So I don't know.
I heard he lost 40.
Well, it's one of those things where the scale is the only truth teller in a situation like that. So let's wait till Friday.
Yeah, you're right. Good point. Alex, great job.
I'm saying that as a person who's had problems with food my whole life. So, if I was to say, hey, I lost 30 pounds, Billy C., it's like, oh, yeah, well, let's wait till we see Alex.
Wow. Hey, kudos to you, though. You look great. And it's a lot of that weight you lost, I think I found. But in any event, Alex, keep up the good work. And hopefully we'll be doing another show next weekend.
Sounds great, Billy C. You take care.
All right, brother. That's my main man, Alex Papali, giving us his thoughts on the title bout results. Going blank here. I got a couple of emails I want to read to wrap up the show. Two of them are, first of all, I want to give a shout out to my man Augie from Riverhead, who's always communicating with me, and I appreciate that. And I got a email, two really good emails that I wanted to read. Not that I didn't get others, but I figured I'd bore you with all of the, hey, we're great to have you back, you're the best, blah blah blah, because I got a bunch of those, and quite honestly, they're I appreciate them, but I hate reading them. But these are along those lines, but they have a much better basis on them. And the first one's from my man David. And he says, hey, Billy C., it was the best news I've heard in a long time that you've resumed doing your podcast. Your wit and wisdom had been deeply missed. My experience with boxing goes back to watching the great Willie Pep fight at the Mechanics Building in Boston. Your feel for boxers, their lives, styles, and abilities is unmatched in sports analysis. Dax, Alex, and Sal complete a great show. In these strange times, yours is a show that cuts through the BS and gets to what matters. Thanks again, Dave. I'm reading this one because, number one, I appreciate the accolades. That's not the reason why I read it. The reason why I read it is because, the end of that email about we cut through the BS and we want to just get to the point is what we try to do here. It irks the hell out of me when I get comments from people that simply don't know the sport saying that I don't know the sport. I've been involved in the sport 33 years. I've done everything but train. I've fought, I've promoted, I've written, I've done a book, I've promoted fights, I've managed fighters, I've been involved with sanctioning bodies, the whole nine. The only thing I never did was I was never a trainer, and I never claimed to be. So I think me, myself, the staff that is on this show, we know the sport, and I always appreciate when I listen to another boxing fan that obviously has a history in the sport that can appreciate it, because it's very easy not to. So I want to thank Dave for that. And my other one is Alex T, the other Alex T. He says, it was great to hear a new episode, and especially the news about Sal made my day. In case you missed it, my man Sal Rocky Senecola is doing great, and we hope to have him back on the show soon. He said, I loved what you said about how you always wanted your show to be like a few friends sitting at a bar talking about boxing. That was spot on. I remember the first episode I ever heard, and you guys discussed current fights and then talked about Ezra Charles and Charlie Burley. That was my kind of show, I thought. I tried listening to other shows. They're just not for me. I'm the old guy now. I don't give a shit about what's trending on Google or Twitter. I don't give a shit about social media. I'm only interested in what happens in the ring. Outside of your audience, I feel like we're a dying breed. Bill, can you imagine someone who says they're a baseball expert and they don't know anything about Ted Williams? Could you imagine someone calling themselves an expert on football and they don't know anything about Jim Brown? Would call those guys idiots. Not in boxing, though. In boxing, you can have zero knowledge about anything aside from what you read on social media. Then you go and start your own podcast, and somehow you've become an expert. Makes no sense. Anyway, welcome back. For me, this show fills a void that I can't get anywhere else. I appreciate everything Alex T just said, and I thank him for expressing it the way he did, because it makes me feel really good that people get, at least some people get, what we're trying to do here. And exactly what Alex says in this email was our goal from day one, 18 years ago. We wanted to be that kind of a show. I'll be honest when I say I had hoped that we would have attracted more younger fans that wanted to learn about the sport. I felt that the void was there, that the education process of the sport of boxing was lacking, even back when we started the show 18 years ago. It's more apparent now that younger boxing fans focus on their fighter and that's it, and everybody else doesn't know. You don't know boxing. That's what I hear a lot. You don't know boxing. Yeah, okay. But the sad part about this email is the most truthful. And it's the part that says, outside of your audience, I feel like we're a dying breed. Well, that's true. We are. And my audience can, back that up. It's not the biggest audience anymore. But I do know that my audience is the most knowledgeable selection and group of boxing fans that are out there. And there's no question about that. And I want to thank all of you that listen and watch this show on a regular basis, because it's for you is why we continue to do it. And it's for you why we came back, despite my opinion on what's going on in the world today, what's going on in the sport, and not just this sport, all sports, but it was for the diehard fan and the diehard boxing fan specifically that we came back, because I do want to help and discuss the sport, the great part of the sport, not all the bullshit that we do hear and see. I hear the other day that fighters getting arrested, and I couldn't counts of this, counts of that, good quality fighters. I don't want to mention names, but you know who I'm talking about. It's a shame, but in any event, listen. Thanks for the emails. Feel free to comment. All you got to do is drop me an email, Billy@TalkinBoxing, TalkinBoxing.com, and I will read it live. And listen, just remember, tune in. Same bat time, same bat channel next time. Until then, ciao, baby.